Pikachu is a very peculiar case in GC lower tiers. While Pikachu's stats are abysmal, it becomes a major threat when holding Light Ball. Light Ball doubles Pikachu's special attack stat, meaning it's even stronger than the legendary electric types, Zapdos and Raikou. Pikachu also sits in a decent speed tier, and has Surf to hit ground types. Pikachu is saved from being a ZU Pokemon thanks to Light Ball. Currently, Pikachu is tiered as UU, where it's unfortunately bad. Pikachu does hit incredibly hard, but it takes hits extremely poorly. It's the definition of a glass cannon. Pikachu is still outsped by several common Pokemon, and there are certain foes that wall it hard. Pikachu is very inconsistent, and it requires Herculean support. It's usually not worth it anyway. It wasn't always like this for Pikachu though. Up until 2018, Pikachu wasn't tiered as UU in GSC, but instead NU. Pikachu was put onto the initial GSC NU tier list, which got decided in the early 2010s. Back then, GSC Underuse was much less refined and active. The old GSC NU tier list was basically chosen at random, which is why Mr. Mime, Haunter, and Pikachu ended up in NU, despite the former two being top tier Pokemon in UU. Eventually, Pikachu was considered a UU caliber Mon too. In 2018, GSC UU and NU got updated tier lists, which better reflected the tiers. Mr. Mime, Haunter, and Pikachu were moved up to UU, and a swath of unviable UU Pokemon dropped down to NU. So, how is Pikachu in old GSC NU? Was it as bad as Pikachu is in modern UU? The answer is hell no. In old GSC NU, Pikachu was a massive threat. It was one of the most influential and lethal Pokemon in the entire tier. Pokemon that gave Pikachu free entry were usually bad altogether, and so are slower set of Pokemon weak to electric. Pikachu was almost impossible to answer defensively. Old GSC NU was very bad at dealing with strong electric types, a trait still present in the current GSC NU metagame. None of the special walls were reliable Pikachu answers. This isn't current UU, where you at least have things like Ampharos and Chansey to hard counter Pikachu. Old GSC NU was a much frailer metagame in general. Once Pikachu got onto the field, something was getting slammed. Pikachu's Stab Thunderbolt obliterated water and flying types, like Octillery, Dugong, and Fearow. At worst, you avoided barely being 2 KO'd by Pikachu, and Pikachu could achieve that 2 KO if spikes were up. Pikachu was an excellent spikes abuser, since none of the spikes immune flying types wanted to handle it. This meant its checks were all taking spikes damage. Spikes made it easier for Pikachu to break through Pokemon like Mr. Mime and Lickitung. All GSC NU also lacked solid grass types. None of the grass types were very good back then, and even then, they got outsped and hit hard by hidden power ice, so they weren't reliable answers. You couldn't counter Pikachu with ground types either, because of Surf. The tier special tanks, like Mr. Mime and Hitmonchan, still took a lot of damage from Thunderbolts, and they took spikes damage. Hitmonchan was also slower than Pikachu, while Mr. Mime merely speed tied it. It was essentially impossible to beat Pikachu defensively. You had to check Pikachu offensively, and thankfully, this was possible to do. Pokemon like Dugtrio, Fearow, Haunter, and Pidgeot outsped Pikachu and did immense damage to it. Dugtrio was particularly notable, since it was immune to Thunderbolt. Dugtrio was the main thing that kept Pikachu from being broken back then. Despite Pikachu's power, it was balanced in all GSC NU. It was impossible to check it defensively, but offensively, you had a lot of options. Another thing that kept Pikachu balanced was its bulk. Pikachu's bulk is dreadful. Nearly everything to a KO'd. Several of the tier's physical attackers just straight up OHKO'd Pikachu. Pikachu couldn't even heal passively with leftovers, since it needs to hold Light Ball. This meant Pikachu got worn down quickly by spikes, and could be put into range of a KO. Because of its bulk, Pikachu struggled to get onto the field, which limited its offensive opportunities. Outside of double switches or revenge killing, Pikachu's only real point of entry was rests from Pokemon like Octillery or Dugong. Pokemon like Azumarill, who gave Pikachu an entry point, stopped being used. All GSC NU was a tier full of heavy hitters, so Pikachu struggled to get onto the fields. Even when you got it onto the field, there were still faster Pokemon who ravaged you. Pikachu was somewhat prediction reliant too, mostly because it had to surf Dugtrio on the Switch. A lot of teams forewent Pikachu back then, because having a Pokemon who can't switch into any attacks was a liability. Pikachu also struggled against the two best Pokemon in the tier, Mr. Mime and Dugtrio. Mr. Mime was a decent answer to Pikachu, since the Speed Tyder could tank Thunderbolts and hit Pikachu hard. Dugtrio could pivot into Thunderbolt and then OHKO Pikachu with Earthquake. It was the premier Pikachu revenge killer. Pikachu wasn't as dominant or broken as it may seem. You could not deny how influential it was though. The entire tier had to adapt to Pikachu, and were still very strong when adapted to. It's just so powerful offensively. Some people really wanted to ban Pikachu, but these complaints mostly disappeared after the rat was adapted to. Pikachu would, in a way though, get banned. In 2018, Pikachu left GCNU when it rose up to UU, alongside Mr. Mime and Haunter. Unfortunately for Pikachu, it didn't replicate its NU success in UU. Pikachu is a meme in GCU. People had hope for it from 2018 to 2020, but it just isn't good. Pikachu is very inconsistent in GC ordeals, and fitting it onto teams is extremely hard. GCNU was a very constrained tier when team building. There's a lot of threats you need to account for in that tier, like Piloswine, Granbull, Mr. Mime, and many more. As such, it's very difficult to justify using a Pokemon with zero defensive utility like Pikachu. You want all your slots to have some defensive utility, and Pikachu is lacking there. In battle, it's very hard to bring in, and there's still several Pokemon who outspeed it. Most of the rest users in GSC or Neos also pack Sleep Talk, so it's hard to bring Pikachu in versus a competent player. Haunter, Dodrio, Electabuzz, Scyther, and Electrode are all capable of outspeeding and KOing Pikachu. Pikachu gets hard countered by Pokemon like Ampharos and Chansey too. It's also more prediction reliant than it was in all GSCNU, since it has to predict Surf on Nidoqueen or Piloswine. Just use Electabuzz over Pikachu. It provides defensive utility, and it's a better electric type. Pikachu is a gimmick in GSCU, and it should never be used on serious teams. Regardless, it can always look back at the NU days, and remember when it was a top tier Pokemon.